Okay, here we go. Part 2 of the Cold War / really Truman, okay? So with that, let's go ahead and take a look at this map real quick. I don't have it in your notes, but it's super important. In fact, so important I'm going to have you add it out somewhere to the side. You are literally looking at the Cold War visually. Now, between the two sides, you of course have red for, what do you think red's for? Of course you know it's for communists. And then you have the blue for the NATO or democratic / non-communist countries. The one thing we talked about in World War I that I really hope you understood is the fact that this divide is not just we don't like Stalin, although we don't. It's also about the fact that, well, let's be honest, they are one type of government, we are another. They do not give power to the people, we do. They don't like freedom, we do. So with this, you're looking at the divide. Now, the NATO alliance, here's what I want you to write down. Make sure on your notes, and I'm going to be looking for it. It says NATO, N-A-T-O, North Atlantic Treaty Organization. Did you get that down? North Atlantic Treaty Organization is going to be your non-communist alliance. So that means anybody that is not communist, democratic by nature. Now, the other side, your versus the Warsaw Pact. That is your communist alliance, okay? With that, of course, the big one we're looking at right here is the Soviet Union. And, of course, all the other little Soviet satellite states outside. Now, there's one country we're going to talk about in just a second that's going to turn red. I'm circling it, foreshadowing, dun dun dun, China. Now, let's talk about the first thing that Truman's going to do. And Truman is trying to stop communism from spreading, and we're going to find out that he's actually going to call it the containment of communists. Containment. The number one thing I want to look at first is going to be the Marshall Plan. He had a Secretary of State. His name is George C. Marshall. Make sure you star his name. You have to know it. I spell it with a $sign in the middle because guess what he's involved with? Money, money, money. So with that, Truman's plan to contain communism was to aid and rebuild all of these little countries in Europe that had completely been demolished by World War II. You remember the pictures of the Battle of Britain, right? That guy delivering milk, completely 100% destroyed London was. And that wasn't just London. It was Paris. It was all of these cities that were completely demolished when all of these troops were marching through and the bombs were dropping and all this kind of stuff like that. Well, all of Europe basically looks like rubble. So Truman and Marshall, his Secretary of State, said to literally help these countries, let's offer them, highlight, star, whatever you need to do, financial aid to the tune of, why don't we just throw $13 billion on the table? Because here's the deal. If we help you, you want to be our friend. But if Stalin helps you, then you'll want to be his friend. Remember, if you're hungry and you have no home and basically your entire country's in shambles, would you take a Subway sandwich from a dictator? You remember that story? Well, guess what? Literally, Marshall Truman said, let's help them before Stalin does. And so the Marshall Plan is put in place. The U.S. benefits from better trade relationships. If you're my friend, you're more likely to trade with me. A little bit better there. It also leaves the legacy of European friendships and transatlantic cooperation with the NATO countries. Stalin, of course, thought it was a trick. Of course he did. He thought we were paying him off. And let's be honest, it was a little bit like that. But I'll be honest with you. It's better for them to be democratic by nature for their people. And it's also nice if we can trade with them. A little bit of imperialism going on here, if you know what I mean. The Western European economies thrived. It helped stop the spread of communism. It helped limit communist appeals in Western Europe because we're helping them. They don't need to take that Subway sandwich from a dictator, otherwise known as Stalin. So Marshall, and you do notice that, what do I put the S as? A $sign. Make sure you remember it. Here's a really good kind of image for the Marshall Plan. I know you don't really have this slide, but it's a really good image. Take a look at it right here. This is literally the dollar amount, U.S. aid per country in millions of dollars. Who got a lot of it? France, Italy, West Germany, Belgium, Greece, Turkey, Norway. You'll notice none of these countries got any aid because what are they? They're communist. This goes to food, animal, fertilizer, anything they need to help. We will help you. Just don't be communist. Now with this, here's a really actually good cartoon. You might see that cartoon on a test, and you might see this question on a test. Pause it, see if you know what you can know about it. Now, Truman Doctrine. Let's get this down. Pause it. All right. Truman Doctrine, March 12, 1947, Truman comes out with his own doctrine. Kind of reminds you of the Monroe Doctrine. But with that, the Truman Doctrine actually is completely 100% opposite. Because here's the deal. He says if there's a country falling in the dangers of communist insurgents, and if there's a country that might fall to communism, Truman says, let's get involved. You see how that is totally opposite of the Monroe Doctrine? Monroe Doctrine was like isolationism, where you stay on your side, I'll stay on mine. Truman said, if there is a country about to fall to communism, I'm helping them. Underline, $400 million from Congress in aid to 2 countries. Circle the 2 countries, Greece and Turkey. I always remember Truman, Turkey. Truman, Turkey, 2 T's, and then Greece. But if you take a look at this map down here, you'll notice this is where my iron, what was it called? The Iron Curtain is right here, and there's 2 countries solidly on the communist or war side of that Iron Curtain. It's Turkey and Greece. Well, think about it. What do you take over first? Whatever's closest to you, right? So Stalin was about to come down and make a meal out of Turkey and Greece. Make a meal out of Turkey. And with that, he sees this as encirclement by capitalist world. So he goes down and he's going to try and take over. He's like, no, I've got to have my side. But Truman says, hey, no, I'm going to give them $400 million so they can stand up to you. Because I'm going to help them before you can. That way they don't have to turn communist. Because let's be honest, they probably want some rights to their people. Now, all of these things that I'm talking about right now, I actually have links to on my live binder. I'll show you at the very end. But some of it, if you watch some videos over it, man, it could really help you understand it. Now, this one right here, very important slide. Pause it and get it down because you need to listen to me with it. Okay, so containment. You'll notice, what did I do? I made the root of containment, which is the word contain, red. Of course, I made it red because it's communist. But with that, the whole idea behind containing something is to keep it in place. So there is this guy, a senior State Department official. I need you to circle his name, George F. Kennan. Are we clear? George F. Kennan, highlight his name. And he comes up with this idea or this phrase, containment, during the post-World War II time period. Now, the definition of containment, unbelievably important for you to memorize it. Containment is the United States policy of using, and I want you to underline this, 3 ways: military, economic, and diplomatic strategies to stall the spread of communism, enhance America's security and influence abroad, and also to prevent the domino effect. I think we've all played or seen dominoes played. That's where when one domino falls and then they all fall. So basically this is the idea that if I need to send troops, do I? Do it. Do I need to send money? Do it. Marshall Plan. If I need to talk it out with people, diplomatic strategies, do it. But anything I can do to make sure that communism does not spread. So what's the root word? Contain communism where it is. Because remember, what color always bleeds the most? Red. If you ever take and do laundry, y'all should be doing your own laundry. It's a good life skill. If you put one red in with all the whites, guess what everything turns? Pink. That's why sometimes if you want to insult a communist leader, you call them a pinko. Because they're half communist, half democratic. Now, there's one thing you definitely need to know about. It's a situation in the Cold War. Because let's be honest, the Cold War is called the Cold War because it never gets hot. There's never fire. There's never shots fired, if you will, really, to be honest with you. So all these little situations are all examples of containment, either military, economic, or diplomatic. The first thing we're going to talk about is the Berlin airlift. Go ahead and pause it, get it down. Now, remember when I told you that Berlin was a little itty-bitty portion of non-communism inside of a whole bunch of communism? Look at this map down here. Little bitty non-communism inside of a whole lot of communism. Well, obviously, it's target. Well, long story short, Stalin ends up trying to take over West Berlin. That was supposed to be ours, that was supposed to be non-communist. He literally blockades, I need you to highlight that, blockades Berlin in June of 1948. And he was basically attempting to take over the western half of Berlin. But we said, no. You can't have it. This was supposed to be ours. Remember at Yalta, the Y, it split Berlin, and then it also split Germany. And they said, you're trying to take over one piece of our land. You can't do that. Because remember, if you let one domino fall, they all fall. And also remember, if you appease a dictator, they'll only want one. You give a mouse a cookie, He'll want a glass of milk. So Truman puts his foot down. You want to make sure you write Truman out beside this slide. This is the president that does this. Truman says, heck no, you ain't getting it. From June 1948 to May 1949, the U.S. and British planes are going to airlift supplies to Berlin because it had been blockaded by Soviet forces. I don't know if you guys understand what a blockade is, but it basically means nothing goes in, nothing goes out. Actually, quiz question, I'd love to ask you this. The Soviets cut off electricity to Berlin. They shut down electricity. They literally would not let medicine in. They would not let food in. So for an entire almost year, nothing but air flights dropping off supplies to Western Berlin. Because Truman said, if I let a little piece of land go communist, will it all fall? So after 2,000 flights, the Soviet Union lifted the blockades. It was an important stand. Truman contained communism, and this is the perfect example of fighting the domino theory. One domino falls, they all fall. In fact, there's an awesome book about this Berlin airlift, and it's literally, man, I'm going to have to look it up. But it's about a little girl getting a chocolate bar that every single, I don't know, week, the same pilot would drop a box of chocolate for the kids of West Berlin. I can't remember the name of it, but I'll have to look it up. Maybe extra credit if somebody comes with me. It's a little girl's chocolate pilot or something like that. Can't remember it, quite sure. 4 sectors of Berlin. Obviously, this section was the section that was blockaded, and so literally he surrounded it. We airlifted supplies. We said, oh, no, you didn't. Okay? Ooh, EOC knowledge. You might see this on a test. See if you can know the answer. All right, 1949. Let's get finished with this last little bit here. 1949, Holy Toledo. Massive country just turned what color? Red. Okay, so as far as containment, red bleeds. This is going to be very scary because Truman just lost China and it turned red. So in June, obviously, you know, Mao Zedong takes over, proclaims the People's Republic of China. I know this is going a little bit back to world history. You know, of course, that China is communist. Well, look at their flag, red. But with that, 2 months later, Mao travels to Moscow. He negotiates. I need you to star this right here. Star it. The Sino-Soviet Treaty of Friendship, Alliance of Mutual Assistance. So now we have one massive red country, friends with another massive red country in 1949. Does it look like we're possibly looking at, I don't know, World War III? And so literally Truman flips out. Cannot possibly imagine this happening, but a massive chunk just turned red. Now, one last thing, and I'm going to be honest with you, I'm not going to give this nearly enough time. The Korean War. Korean War is from 1950 to 1953. Remember when I said North Korea, or Korea had been temporarily divided at the 38th parallel? Well, here we go. Literally, North Korea invades South Korea. North Korea, I need you to make it a note out beside this line, communist. North Korea, communist. North is always communist. South is always non-communist. South Korea was a democracy. Truman orders the U.S. forces to assist the South Koreans. Literally, this is going to be Douglas MacArthur being sent in to help South Korea. This was one of the very first wars of containment, except for I have to be very careful about calling it a war because technically it was called a police action. Some people even call Korea the Forgotten War because it was only 3 years and oftentimes it's overlooked. But if you want to know a picture-perfect example of containment through a war, it is the Korean War. But everybody will tell you it's the Vietnam War. Truman's literally gives over policy and negotiations and all that kind of stuff like that to the United Nations. So you're going to want to star that. If you actually want to know who fought the Korean War, maybe this is why we don't study it as much, the UN is in charge of it. But I will tell you, Douglas MacArthur is in command of the UN troops, and it's mostly U.S. troops. It is called the Forgotten War, but I will tell you it is massively important because North Korea tries to take over South Korea. South Korea would have been then red, and remember, our whole goal is to stop the red from spreading, or to, what's that word? Contain communism. So we push them back over across the 38th parallel. The Korean War basically goes down as, if you will, a little bit of a victory. But I am going to tell you, it was a bloody, ruthless war. And if you ever meet a Korean War veteran, they will tell you it is not as pretty as you could possibly imagine. Funny thing, quiz question, I might be able to tell you about this one. Douglas MacArthur totally goes against Truman in the end, and Truman fires him because Douglas MacArthur says, you can't fight communism like this. And Truman said, you're fired, like Donald Trump style. All right, end of part 2.